All right. If you are curious about the chapters that we just finished up 5, and now we're skipping ahead to 9. This textbook is made in such a way that you can jump around. You don't have to follow sequentially. Now I will say that we're gonna have to kind of go back and cover some topics from prior chapters, but I'll just cover those topics and cover the code that's necessary as we go along. So chapter 9 is Flexbox, and this entire week is Flexbox. And so as of right now, you've probably never dealt with Flexbox. And my objective is to get you comfortable with Flexbox by the end of this week. And there are a lot of properties, CSS properties, and there's a lot to Flexbox. And so when I say there's a lot of properties, I mean in this PowerPoint alone, we will cover, I'm just going to say 10, 15, I don't know, 8. There are many CSS properties that go into Flexbox, and then all of the values that come along with those properties. So what is Flexbox? Well, let's just kind of start with this. It is a tool for responsive positioning. So in the past, positioning, if you go pretty far back with web development, positioning used to be done with HTML tables, and that was done in the 90s, and then in the 2000s, moving things around on the page was done again in the 90s with tables, and then in the 2000s there were these tools. A lot were used with CSS Floats, and so you might have even seen the float property in CSS, and that was pretty common. However, there were a lot of challenges with using floats, and when it came to responsiveness, and there were a lot of things that it just didn't really do well, or was more difficult than it should be with using floats. And so a tool was developed, and pretty commonly used nowadays is this CSS Flexbox. And in fact, we're going to use Flexbox in this class, and then another tool that we're going to use here soon is called Bootstrap, and Bootstrap also uses Flexbox. And so again, this is a tool for positioning. Specifically, it's a tool that was built for responsive positioning, for responsive web development. And so a lot of this is learning some terminology and all of the different properties. And so let's kind of do a lot of examples. I'll do coding examples as I'm going through these terms and these properties. So we are going to use Flexbox to lay out a page, and then all of these terms that come along with Flexbox. We have the Flexbox itself. Inside of the Flexbox, we have flex items. We have what's called a main axis and a cross axis, as well as a flex direction. So we'll kind of break down those terms. And then how the flex direction affects the alignment, such as justify content and align items. And so when you change the flex direction, it changes these other properties as well. And so again, let's kind of start with a code demo. And this slide, if you kind of jump ahead to slide 4, is a nav menu created using Flexbox. And so you kind of have these buttons that I can kind of mimic that. Something like this. Now, one thing that Let me put this inside of a nav tag, even though I don't think I need to do anything with a nav tag. I guess the first thing worth noting is that since we have links, let's go ahead and put the links in a nav tag. That's considered semantic. That's good practice. It's also very common, semantically speaking, since a nav bar is a list of links, to put a nav bar inside of a UL. And so these are both kind of common things that you see, nav bars inside of nav, and then a UL. Actually, I didn't do this correct. Each LI is an anchor tag. And so you could do something like link 1, link 2, and we'll style this up real quick, and then we'll get into how to use Flexbox with a nav bar. Okay, and so if we just save this and take a quick look at it, we're going to have a lot of styling to do. But what we're looking at is 3 links. Of course, in our embedded style, we can turn off the bullet points on our list. List style type of none is going to turn off our bullet points. We want these to look like buttons. And so remember that anchor tags are inline elements, but LIs are block elements. And so maybe let's style the LI. Since LIs are block, and let's just give a background color of green and a border and see what that does. Okay, so now our LIs are going all the way across the page, and that's their default behavior, right? A block level element takes 100% width of the parent container. The parent, well, the UL, the parent is the body, so it's going 100% width. Let's go ahead and in our unordered list, let's just do a display flex. And so what we've done here is we've turned our UL into a flexbox. And by default, the flexbox is in a row. And so we might need to continue on our example. Let me see if I start adding some padding and things like this. What happens? So let me before I go too far. I've really only done one thing with Flexbox so far, which is display flex. This is kind of like the starting point for Flexbox. So that's all I really wanted to show. In this example, and I might want to simplify this example, the LIs, because the LIs are the children of our flex box. The UL is display flex, and each LI becomes a flex item. So the direct children of the UL become what are called flex items. So the UL is displaying flex, and then each LI becomes a child, a flex item, and the box, the flex box, if you will, has what's known as a main axis and a cross axis. the main axis is the direction the children go, right? You can kind of see that the children are going horizontally across the page. They're not going vertical. And so they're in a row kind of orientation. So by targeting the UL, the children go in a row by default, and therefore the cross axis is vertical. Now you can change that orientation, but this is sort of the default. And so if I wanted to change the first property that we learn is to display flex, and that's done on a parent. And then all of its children become flex items. All the items are going to go in a row by default. There's just certain. Now, kind of looking at their example, nav, ul, lia, this is all good. The ul is going to be display flex. We've got that. Probably what I need to do is, add some padding and margin in all of this to either the LIs or the anchor tags themselves. Probably the LI tag, I would add some padding. Let's just add 10 pixels of padding on all four sides. You can start to see them looking like buttons. Now, really, there's only one CSS property. There's also flex direction column. If you want to change that default so they're kind of back in that column view, you could change the flex direction column. And so you would apply this to the UL flex direction column. I'm not going to keep this. I just want to show it real quick. Okay, and they go back 100% width. Now, what's a little funny here, yeah, and I know where your question is going to go, so let me see if I can answer it before you ask it. Because here, so what's happening? Why, when I put them in a column, do they take up 100% width? And when they're not in a column, like they're in a row, they don't take up 100% width. Is that your question, Vinny?
No, I was just wondering why you're doing it embedded CSS and not like a style sheet. I don't know if that's important.
Just for the quick, I can quickly get to embedded. Then to click on another file.
So you can do it in all three though.
Yeah. There's 3 ways to write it, and I'm just writing it embedded because it's quick that way. Yeah.
Do you need the display flex even if you put in the flex direction?
Yes. So you have to display flex in order to use these other ones. Yeah, display flex is like this. To me, this is the starting line. Like, to have a flex box, you have to have display flex. So I thought the question you were going to ask is like, why here they're basically only going so wide, and it turns out since this nav the children are taking up 100% width of the parent. Well, as it turns out, this UL isn't very wide. So the 3 children are only as wide as that UL. I wonder here if I say link 2. It's making it a little wider. But if this UL were to be wider, then these links would take up more space. Let's do one more. next column. One more property. Justify content is going to be how you move content around on the main axis. So keep in mind, we turned the UL into a flex box, and going across in a row format, we've got the main axis. And so if you want to move content around on the main axis, you use this property called justify content. And by default, all the items are left aligned, and that's the default flex start. Flex end would be the opposite, kind of on the right aligned on the row. Center is just that. Now I would say that a big benefit of Flexbox is center alignment. Oddly enough, in the history of getting things moved around on the page, getting something in the center has been way harder than it should be. And so besides just getting some responsive positioning and learning positioning, which is what we're doing in this chapter, one of the big benefits of Flexbox is getting things not only horizontally in the center, but vertically in the center. And so getting things, again, that's just a big benefit of Flexbox, is getting things center aligned. Space between, you can kind of see, I just like this graphic, that's why I put it in here. Space between has an even amount of space between each item, but the items themselves are kind of pushed to the edges. Space around kind of has a different amount of space on the left and the right hand side, but an even amount of space in the middle. Right? So space around kind of has some margin on the left and margin on the right, which is different than the margins kind of here in the middle. And then space evenly, and then these are all the values for justify content. Space evenly, you can kind of see, has even spacing on all sides. Now I just want to demonstrate here, and I don't think that you're actually going to see a difference if I do a flex end on my unordered list. I don't think you're going to see a difference. Justify content, space, and interestingly enough, spaced around, it did come with, oh, there we go. So space around is what we're seeing in this example. So this is actually really nice. If you stop and think about it, we've made this nav bar with two CSS properties that goes across the page and responds pretty well. Right? Of course, if we have more links, it still inherently works. What does happen in other examples is if we have, keep in mind, each LI is a flex item. Now these anchor tags inside of the LIs, these are not flex items. It's only the direct children that are flex items. So that's something worth kind of remembering. Only the direct children, each LI in other words, are flex items. Let's just tinker with this. Let's just do flex end. Flex end. I keep closing my code. So there's your flex end. Let's just take a look at center, justify content center. Space between. Okay, so pretty easy to move around the children inside of a Flexbox using justify content. Keeping in mind, justify content is on the main axis. Now, if I change that let's bring back the flex direction of column. Okay, notice justify content no longer did space between, right? Now we got to work with the other property, which is align items. Align items is going to be on that cross axis. And so if I do align items on flex end, notice justify content is no longer working because we changed the flex direction. So let's go ahead and do align items to flex hyphen end. Let's bring back, hold on, flex direction column. I want to take out the flex direction column. And give this a height. There we go. Now they're at the bottom. So again, I wanted to put this back in the row format. And sorry that my demonstration's a little bit jumpy here.
Is the line items, is that for moving around on the cross axis?
Align items moves it around on the cross axis, and that's what you're seeing here. Align items on flex end kind of puts it at the bottom of the viewport. Right, so if I bring back justify content space between, now we're at the bottom of the page and spacing between. Right, so that's when it's in a row format. If I change it to a column, the justify content space between, keep in mind the column, here's the rule that I have not laid out. Changing the flex direction changes the main axis and the cross axis. So by default, the main axis is horizontal, right? When you change the flex direction to column, the main axis is vertical. So changing the flex direction, gosh, I can't even type this morning. The main axis is vertical. So what does justify content do? It changes the axis, right? So space between used to space things out horizontally. Now space between is spacing things out vertically.
What happens to all your links?
What happened to all my links?
Yeah, it's...
Oh, you just can't see them.
No.
There they are.
Okay.
I had it pulled off to the side. There you go. So justify content moves things around on the main axis. Align items moves things around on the cross axis. And changing the flex direction changes what the main axis is and changes what the cross axis is. Okay, just switches it up. Now, if you want to align all the children the same way, you can use align items. If you target an individual child, and for example, you want this third child to be different than the other children, you can target that individual child and do an align self property. So again, hopefully, because I think my demonstrations have been a little choppy at best. So what are the rules so far that we've learned? The display flex property changes a box element into a flex box. When I say a block box, I'll say a block level element into a flex box. Justify hyphen content moves elements around on the main axis. Let's say moves flex items around on the main axis. What is a flex item then? So let's define a flex item. A flex item, a direct child of the flex box. Okay, now I'm not talking about like a child inside of a child, right? So that's a grandchild. A direct child of the flex box is considered a flex item. So in our case here, all of our LIs are considered flex items. Align items moves flex items around on the cross axis. And then we have flex direction, changes from row to column and modifies the main, not even modify, and flips the main axis and cross axis, right? What was the main axis becomes a cross, and what becomes a cross becomes a main. Again, in my demonstration, if I kind of just do this, notice that the justify content space between is spacing between horizontally, right? And align items flex end, well, align items is pushing things down vertically, right? So align items is our cross axis, justify content is our main axis. If I change the flex direction from row to column, now space between spaces things vertically, space between spaces things vertically, and align items flex end is pushing it horizontally. Okay, and so that's kind of with your nav bar. I just want to do another example. Keep these here. And so I've got 3 paragraphs inside of a section, and they all have different amounts of content. Okay, and so if I just kind of style these paragraphs, with light blue. Now I'm going to take that section and tell it to display flex. And you can see that the parent kind kind of the default behavior here. The parent puts the children into a flex box. And so the section is the parent, and then each paragraph is a flex item. Now, the reason I'm showing this is because you can see that depending on the content, they kind of take up this different amounts of space. And so there's things that you can do with Flexbox to kind of change that. But I just wanted to show kind of the default behavior, how much space they take up. This one has one part. This one is twice as long as that, and this one is 3 times that, right? So this is double the first, and this is triple the first as far as how much content is in it. Now, it's interestingly enough, they all take up the same height, right? That's not normal. Normally, the more content you have in something, the taller it is. So the width here kind of adapts based on the content that's in it, and they all take up the same height. It's just with more content, the wider it is. Again, that's not normally the case. Before I turned the Flexbox on, you could even see that this paragraph just took up more space vertically. Right now, this paragraph is taking up more space horizontally. And so as we continue now, we start talking about how to change how wide each one of these pieces are, and you can give it a flex basis, which changes how wide an element is inside of a flex box, and then you get into things like flex grow. Now there's one more thing I want to talk about here, flex wrap, and I can kind of demonstrate this kind of quickly. You'll quickly notice if I paste this paragraph a whole bunch of times, eventually, if you have so many children, this becomes somewhat undesirable, and you might want to start having these children wrap down onto another line, which is where flex wrap comes into play. So I'll demonstrate flex wrap of wrap. By default, these things are not set to wrap, and so let's see. I might have to add a width on this. So let's set the flex wrap to wrap. And because there's no width, that's basically making each one cause its own line break. And this is the result right now. So we need to start talking about how to change the width. And there's a couple of things that you can look at now that conversation comes up. How wide is everything? And you're going to notice that you can do a flex basis as a percentage or a hard number of pixels. So let's do a flex basis. This is the equivalent of setting a width that's responsive on our flex children. So in this example, the parent is main, and the nav section and aside all have a flex basis set. So let's go here and do a flex basis of 25%. And we need to do this on the children, excuse me, not the parent. Okay. Now with flex basis, all of our children are 25%, and we're wrapping. Notice if we don't wrap, what happens? right? That doesn't really work, but we could set a flex basis to 25% and then tell all the children to wrap, and this is the desirable effect, right? Each child is 25% wide and wrapping down the page. And again, they have an even amount of height regardless of the content that's in them. It's kind of auto-calculated for that height. So display flex, let's add to our notes here what is new. Flex wrap. Flex wrap will wrap children if their widths are more than the page width, maybe their parents' width. And flex basis applied to the child, and this is the mistake that that I made and had to fix, applied to the children, can set the width okay. And one of the things that I was doing probably incorrectly at one point when I was learning this was you can still set a width with the width property. It just doesn't interact as well with Flexbox, and I can remember some of my old code where I was setting a width, and instead of using flex basis, I was using the width property, and I would tell you that I don't remember the exact problems that it caused, but I remember it causing problems for me. And so again, display flex, all the children become flex items. There becomes a main axis and a cross axis. So again, all these terms, main axis by default is horizontal, and cross axis is vertical. Justify content moves things around on the main axis. Align items remove things around on the cross axis. Flex direction can change it from row to column or column to row. Flex basis is how you're going to set the width of your child elements, and flex wrap gets them to wrap instead of cramming them all into one row, gets them to wrap onto multiple rows. Then there's this concept of flex grow. And so if you set a flex basis to a size, and this might need to be pixels, which is, as you know, pixels are an absolute measurement, not a relative. Right now I'm using percents for my flex basis. And then you have this flex grow property, which is 1 to 3, which it's not like it's not 1 pixel or 1 M or anything like that. It's just a relative to the other children. And so basically this would grow at 3 times as fast as a flex grow of 1. And so these are just relative numbers to one another. And so by default, you could see at some point the section, which is this middle section, grows 3 times as fast as the nav, which is on the left, and the aside, which is on the right. And so if your screen, gets bigger, in other words, you're on a different device, the section will be 3 times a different device. The size, it might be in a mobile view. So flex grow, let's change my demo here, and I'll go back down to 3 paragraphs. And I'll set my flex basis on all paragraphs to be 100 pixels. And so let's just look at this.
Basis is only for the width, correct?
Yeah. Yeah, flex basis is for the width. Tell you what, I want to take a look at something because in order for this to demo properly, I want to take a look. We're at a good point for a break. Anyways, we're 40 minutes in. Let's take a break. Come back in. Okay, guys, we're back. And one thing, you know, I have to remember is that when you start messing with the width of the children, you start messing with flex basis. If you take that off, right, all we're doing is displaying flex. Keep in mind, you know, it's going to go as wide as the parent container. In other words, these paragraphs are going all the way across the page because, well, that's the amount of space they have to fill. As soon as you set a width, well, they're not going to anymore unless you tell them how you want them to grow. Like basically, okay, they're 100 pixels wide. Unless you tell them how you want them to grow. Or if the screen is bigger, then you tell them how to grow. If it's smaller, then you tell them how to shrink. So a lot of times when you set the flex basis, it's very common to set the flex growth and to set the flex shrink. And that will, again, allow them to kind of be responsive in nature. And so we've got 3 paragraphs, and so I thought I'd also kind of demonstrate this selector called the Nth Child. And so this is a pseudo selector, if you will, that says, okay, grab every paragraph that is the first child of its parent. And just to demonstrate that, if I change this text color to red, you can see I'm grabbing only the paragraph that is a first child of its parent. We could do Nth Child 2, and this would say color green, and P:\Nth Child 3, just to demonstrate color yellow. Okay, just this pseudo selector called Nth Child that says, hey, every paragraph that is whatever number child. Now what we need to do is set the flex grow, and we're going to set it for all 3. Now just for the sake of this, I'm going to set the middle one to grow twice as fast as the first and third, and so I'll say 2. And so anything bigger than 300 pixels wide, this middle one will grow twice as fast as the others, and you'll be able to see that. Now kind of down here, they're all roughly 100 pixels wide, but then as they grow, you could see that middle section is twice basically the width of the first and third. So it's pretty common to set the flex grow and the flex shrink. Now we have not demonstrated flex shrink, and that's kind of the opposite. If we set the flex basis to be, maybe 1,000 pixels, we'll set the flex shrink 1. And we'll say this one shrinks twice as fast as the others now on the other way down. So since we are now, we don't have 3,000 pixels wide, right? So what you're seeing here is this middle one is basically shrinking twice as fast as the outer two. And so you set your flex basis, and then you set it to shrink or grow accordingly. And so it is just common to set all three. A flex grow, a flex shrink, and a flex basis. And because of that, because there's a it's common to kind of do all three, they make a shorthand for it, which is just the flex property. The flex property sets a basis, which is the third value. The flex grow is the first value, the flex shrink is the second value, and the flex basis is the third. Now I was setting the flex basis on this generic P selector, but let me kind of go back to what you might do. Now we have this shorthand flex. We'll say 100 pixels. So this is saying the flex basis is 100 pixels of this paragraph. The flex grow is 1. The flex shrink is 1. Flex 2 to 100 pixels. And this is, again, a shorthand for those three. Now because, again, what we're doing here is we're saying, okay, flex basis of 100 pixels. So they're roughly 100 pixels at the start. And then you're going to see that middle one grow twice as fast. And this is equivalent to that first demo that I did. But it's just now using that shorthand property. The other way was where I set the flex shrink. And this would be more of a demo of the second example I did, where the middle one shrinks twice as fast, again, depending on the screen width. So there's the shorthand flex. And so, again, kind of taking notes as I'm going, we got flex basis, we have flex grow, and again, there's no like pixels or M's here. Determines how fast the child will grow if the width is wider than, if the screen width is wider than the basis. Then there's flex shrink, which is just the opposite, determines how fast the child will shrink relative to its peers if the screen width is more narrow than and then you've got shorthand flex property, shorthand for flex basis, flex grow, and flex shrink. Now at the beginning of this I said we would have 10 to 15 properties. Let's see how many we have so far. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So flex, shrink, flex. I said 10 to 15, and I was close. So this is the end of what I'll say is the first lecture on Flexbox. I'm going to go ahead and open up some homework, and then today, towards the end of class, I'm going to do another demonstration on Flexbox because, again, this whole week is about mastering Flexbox. This is a good article on CSStricks.com. I'm going to go ahead and link to it in the Discord. And I would ask that you read this article before doing any homework or lab. It's just a good reinforcement of the concepts that we've already covered.